Clara Bennett arrived at the Dawson Ranch just before sunset, carrying a small suitcase and a bag of groceries. She was 32, hardworking, and used to taking whatever cooking job she could find to keep her little catering business alive. Tonight's job seemed simple: prepare dinner for a widowed rancher and his 6 sons. The Montana rain had made the dirt roads muddy, but Clara had promised to come. She had no idea that one evening in that lonely farmhouse would change everything. When she stepped inside, 6 boys stared at her from around the kitchen table, their expressions ranging from suspicious to completely uninterested. Daniel Dawson, their 39-year-old father, stood near the doorway. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I only need you for tonight." Clara smiled politely and tied an apron around her waist. "Then tonight we'll make the best of it." She opened the pantry and discovered potatoes, onions, flour, beans, a little ground beef, and some vegetables. It wasn't much, but Clara knew how to turn simple ingredients into something comforting. As she began chopping, the youngest boy, Ben, who was only 5, slowly approached the kitchen counter. "What are you making?" he asked. "Beef and potatoes too," Clara replied. "And maybe some warm biscuits if your father has enough flour." Ben looked toward Daniel, who nodded. Soon, the kitchen filled with the smell of onions, herbs, and freshly baked biscuits. One by one, the other boys drifted closer, pretending they weren't interested. Clara noticed their curiosity but said nothing. She simply kept cooking, humming softly as rain tapped against the windows. When dinner was finally ready, Clara placed steaming bowls on the table. The 6 boys sat down, and Daniel joined them. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Then Ben took his first bite and suddenly smiled. "This is really good," he whispered. His brothers quickly agreed. Even Daniel looked surprised. The boys began asking Clara questions about the recipe, her hometown, and whether she could make biscuits again someday. Clara laughed and told them cooking was mostly about patience and caring. Then Ben suddenly looked at her and said, "My mom used to make food like this." The room became quiet. Clara gently set down her spoon. She knew their mother had passed away years earlier. Instead of pretending to replace her, Clara simply said, "She must have been very special." Ben nodded, and for the first time that night, the sadness in his eyes softened. After dinner, the boys followed Clara into the kitchen to help clean. Daniel watched from the doorway, amazed. His sons had barely spoken to hired cooks before, yet now they were laughing around Clara as if they had known her for years. Clara glanced at the clock and realized the evening was almost over. She began gathering her things, ready to leave once the rain stopped. But outside, the storm had become stronger, making the road dangerous. Daniel told her she should stay until morning. Clara reluctantly agreed. Before going to bed, she found Ben sitting alone near the kitchen. "Are you leaving tomorrow?" he asked quietly. Clara smiled. "I have to." Ben lowered his head. "I wish you could stay." Clara gently patted his shoulder and promised they would have breakfast together. Neither of them knew that by sunrise, the entire Dawson family would be calling her something she never expected to hear. Clara woke before sunrise to the sound of footsteps in the kitchen. When she walked downstairs, she found all 6 boys waiting around the table. Ben held an empty plate and looked at her hopefully. "Are you making breakfast?" he asked. Clara laughed softly. "Good morning to you too." She rolled up her sleeves and began preparing pancakes, scrambled eggs, and crispy potatoes. The boys helped set the table without being asked. Daniel stood silently in the doorway, watching the scene. For years, breakfast had been rushed and quiet in the Dawson house. That morning, the kitchen was filled with laughter, questions, and the smell of fresh food. Daniel realized something had changed. As Clara placed the last pancakes on the table, Ben suddenly looked up at her. "Can we call you Mom?" he asked innocently. Clara froze for a moment. The other boys stared at her, waiting for her answer. She knelt beside Ben and gently held his hands. "Your mother will always be your mother," she said. "Nobody could ever take her place." Ben's eyes became watery. "I know," he whispered. "But you make us feel happy." Clara hugged him gently. Daniel turned away, pretending to look outside, but his expression revealed how deeply the moment had touched him. The boys began calling her Clara again, but something between them had quietly changed. After breakfast, Clara packed her suitcase. The storm had finally ended, and sunlight appeared over the Montana hills. She thanked Daniel for the work and stepped onto the porch. The boys followed her outside. Jake, the oldest, tried to hide his disappointment, while little Ben openly held onto her hand. "Will you come back?" he asked. Clara looked at Daniel. He seemed nervous, as though he wanted to ask the same question but didn't know how. Finally he said, "You don't have to decide anything today. But if you wanted to come back, the boys would be very happy." Clara smiled. "I think I'd like that." 6 boys immediately cheered, and Daniel laughed for the first time in a long while. Clara returned the following afternoon, then the next day, and eventually several times each week. She taught the boys simple recipes and encouraged them to help around the ranch house. She never tried to replace their mother. Instead, she helped them remember that loving someone new did not mean forgetting someone they had lost. Daniel also began changing. He laughed more, joined the boys at dinner, and started talking about his own dreams again. One evening, while Clara was preparing apple pie, Daniel quietly told her, "I thought this house would always feel empty." Clara looked at him and smiled. "Maybe it only needed people willing to fill it with laughter again." Daniel nodded, realizing that Clara had brought something much bigger than food into their lives. Months passed, and the Dawson Ranch became a completely different place. The 6 boys still remembered their mother, but they also had new memories filled with laughter, cooking, family games, and warm evenings around the table. One Sunday morning, Ben ran across the yard and shouted, "Mom! Dad! Come see this!" Clara stopped in surprise, while Daniel smiled beside her. She looked at him, and he simply reached for her hand. Clara had arrived months earlier as a stranger hired for one night. She never expected to become part of the family. But sometimes, life brings people together in the most unexpected ways. She came to cook one dinner, yet she ended up helping 6 lonely boys find happiness again, and giving a grieving father a reason to believe that home could feel warm once more.